Hello, this is Lord's Legion and welcome to a brand new countdown, and in this video we're going to be counting down the top 10 pieces of concept art from the Dark Knight Trilogy. Now usually I would make at least one of these every month or so, but since my schedule has been pretty hit and miss as of late and I have been doing as many videos, the least I can do is give everyone what they want. And I was hoping that I would have this be a top 15 instead, but looking for concept art from the Dark Knight Trilogy is rather scarce surprisingly. But like in every single concept art countdown, I will have a poll in this video so everyone can vote on which franchise I should focus on next. And whichever gets the most votes will automatically be the franchise I'll be focused on next and looking at their pieces of concept art. So without further ado, let's begin with the countdown. So kicking off the list at number 10, we have the Proto-Bat Signal from Batman Begins. Now this is a rather iconic scene from Batman Begins in that Falcone gets strapped onto the signal and his silhouette ultimately forms a bat signal, as which does reveal the backstory behind the entire bat signal in the first place. Now there really isn't too much to say about this, mainly because it plays off very similar in the film, but I still think it's very interesting how they actually managed to create this form of imagery. And given how the bat signal is such an important part of the Batman mythos, it is very cool how they tackled the origin behind bat signal in the Nolanverse, if you will. Again, there isn't really too much to add, but it is cool that we do have a better look on how they actually tackled the bat signal in general. Coming in at number 9, we have the Hanging Bat from the Dark Knight. Now again, much like the last entry, there isn't really too much to decipher from this piece of concept art, mainly because it plays off very similar within the final film, but the way it's been portrayed in this piece of concept art does appear to be much darker than what we ended up getting. And if you look at other pieces of concept art from the Dark Knight specifically, you can sense that it was going to be a much darker film in general. And in a way it does kind of foreshadow what's going to happen with Batman near the end of the film, and the way it's been portrayed in this piece of concept art does paint a more haunting and hopeless tone. Not really too much more to add on this one, but I do think it's a really haunting image regardless. Coming in at number 8, we have the Batpod from the Dark Knight. Now I'm not quite sure if it's just the fact that they didn't add in the black paint, but to me the Batpod does seem to be somewhat cleaner than what we finally got, even though this and the final design are very similar from one another. But even with that being said, it is still cool that we do get to see the Batpod and how all of the different pieces add up together. It just gives you a better idea on how the Batpod was made and how it was designed. And again, this concept design is very similar to what we ended up getting, and I always thought the Batpod was a rather kick-ass vehicle. Coming in at number 7, we have the Unused Choker masks from the Dark Knight. Now out of the 3 masks, we do know that the one in the middle is the only one that has actually been used in the final film. However, something that the 3 do share in common is the fact that they were going to be much creepier in tone, and they almost resemble something that you would expect to see from the Purge movies. And sure, the other masks that we do see in the final film do look fairly gritty and intimidating, but in these images they look much creepier. And the one on the far right in particular just looks incredibly haunting to me, and like with some of the other pieces of concept art from the Dark Knight, once again they do illustrate on how the film was originally going to be much darker. And believe it or not, this isn't even the creepiest piece of concept art from the Dark Knight, and trust me, we'll get into that later. Coming in at number 6, we have the early Catsuit from The Dark Knight Rises. Now although this is only just an earlier sketch for the Catwoman costume, majority of it still holds up from the final design, especially from the mask and cat ears. And while the final design was mostly basic, at one point they were going to add more details to the catsuit. We have the one on the left, which almost resembles a human zipper, and then we also have the one on the right that does sport more stripes. And I honestly prefer the one on the right because it just looks more tactical to me, and it just shows off more of a flair and personality in general in comparison to what we ended up getting. Granted, I do very much enjoy the final design, but I think a little more pattern within the final costume would have been nice. Coming in at number 5, we have the Gothic Gotham City from Batman Begins. Now whether you like Batman Begins or not, you do have to give credit where credit is due in that it was the only film in the trilogy that tried to give Gotham City its Gothic aesthetic. And while the final city was a good amalgamation of the traditional Gotham City with a dash of Nolan's realistic aesthetic, I would have much rather seen this version of Gotham City because it looks more traditional to what you would traditionally see in other mediums. I just love how certain buildings look more unusual than what you would see in real life, and I especially love the foggy atmosphere. And it ultimately makes Gotham City a place that you would never want to visit, and that's the whole point of Gotham City in general. It's supposed to be unnerving. And I'll say it again, I would much rather see this version of Gotham than a more down-to-earth Gotham that we've seen in the later films, because in the later films, if anyone assumed that it was Chicago, then you'd be none the wiser. Coming in at number 4, we have the unused Bane mask from The Dark Knight Rises. Now, I would be the first person who would agree in that it was a good move on their part to not adapt the wrestler mask for The Dark Knight Rises, but even with that being said, I still have to give them props for actually trying to experiment on that concept and try and ground it so that it could work for live action. And in terms of the Nolan verse, I think that this would have been the closest thing you could ever get away with. And even with this design, you can still see that the tubes were still very much intact, and that the gas underneath his mask would actually stem from the collar wrapped around his neck, which would have been a cool idea to see on screen. I know that some people would have much rather seen a full face mask for Bane for The Dark Knight Rises, but I do think it was for the best for them to stick with the final design, but even then, this is a rather impressive attempt to adapt the more traditional Bane mask from the comics, even if it doesn't look recognisable at first glance. So for number 3, we have Bane and Two-Face from The Dark Knight. Now, I have been saying this multiple times now, but when you look at the concept art for The Dark Knight specifically, you can sense that it was going to be a much darker film in general. And I think this early sketch does demonstrate this rather well. And while Harvey Dent's transformation plays very similar to the final film, at one point it did seem like instead of using the gas that would cover half of his face and body, at one point he would have been dipped in acid right here and then, while Batman would actually witness his transformation firsthand. Hell, even the more burnt face for Two-Face does look very similar to the final design, despite the fact that it's only been drawn in black and white. And I think this piece of concept art does perfectly represent how the original version of the film would have been more graphic in terms of tone. And I'm not sure exactly on if it's just a sketch, but it did seem like at one point they were going to even consider a more gothic aesthetic for Gotham City. Coming in at number 2, we have the spandex looking batsuit from Batman Begins. Now this batsuit is very similar to the final design in the movie, from the batsuit being all black to even the bat belt's design. But even when you look at this early sketch for the Bat costume, you can sense that at one point they were going to go in an even more comic booky vibe. And even though this batsuit still has a lot of its plating, it did look very rubbery in the sense that it looked more like a traditional comic book costume. And at one point they even considered on having Batman having his white eyes, which did ultimately carry over to the Dark Knight. And even then, the bat cowl seems a lot more sleek in the sense that he could actually move his head around. And I know that this is mostly just the art style on as to why it looks the way it does, but even then I still think that this looks very kick-ass from its more rubbery look to even the white eyes, which once again makes it feel more like a comic book costume. And finally for number 1 we have the horrifying Joker from The Dark Knight. Now if you wasn't convinced earlier on how The Dark Knight was originally going to be a much darker film, look no further than this piece of concept art, because this design is the stuff of your nightmares. And even in terms of creepiness, it even puts Heath Ledger to shame, because this version of the Joker doesn't even look human to me, and it reminds me of something you would see from a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. I don't even need to explain on why this version of the Joker looks all the more horrifying, because this piece of concept art just speaks for itself. And what's even creepier is that if you look at his arms, you can see that at one point they were actually going to be bleached white, while when you do see his full face, they look more fleshy, almost like he's wearing a skin mask. And for all these reasons and so much more, this is why this piece of concept art takes the cake as the most interesting from the Dark Knight Trilogy. So which piece of concept art from the Dark Knight Trilogy did you personally find the most interesting? Comment below and share some thoughts, and don't forget to check out the poll and vote on which franchise I should focus on next. And as always, thank you guys for watching this video, please like and subscribe, take care and have a good one.